I never thought I'd spend my 64th birthday sitting on a bench outside a Social Security office in Columbus, Ohio, with a garbage bag full of my own clothes at my feet. That morning, my son had handed me the bag. Not a suitcase, not even a duffel. A black garbage bag, the kind you'd use for yard waste, tied at the top with a loose knot. My daughter-in-law had packed it while I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth. I didn't know what was happening until I was already in the passenger seat of their Kia, and my son was driving, and nobody was saying anything, and I noticed we weren't heading toward the diner where we always went for my birthday. "Where are we going?" I asked. He kept his eyes on the road. "We need to talk about some things, Dad." That was how it started. My name is Theodore. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working maintenance and facilities management for the Columbus Metropolitan Library System. I retired 3 years ago with a modest pension, Social Security, and what I thought was a decent relationship with my only child. My wife, Lorraine, passed from ovarian cancer 6 years back. After she was gone, my son, his name is Jeffrey, invited me to move into the spare bedroom of his house in Westerville. I thought it was kindness. I thought he was being the man his mother had raised him to be. I was wrong about that. The drive took 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard the whole way, telling myself this was something else, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. Jeffrey pulled into the parking lot of the Social Security Administration office on East Broad Street and put the car in park. The engine kept running. "We've been talking," he said, "and we need our space back. The house feels crowded. Natalie's been stressed. The kids need the room." Natalie, his wife. She had redecorated the spare bedroom twice since I moved in, both times without telling me, and each time she'd quietly moved my things a little further toward the corner. I'd thought I was imagining it. "It's your birthday," I said. I don't know why that was the thing I said. It was the only thing in my head. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry about the timing, but we've been putting it off, and it wasn't fair to keep putting it off." He handed me an envelope. Inside was $340 in cash and a handwritten list of 3 names: a shelter on Livingston Avenue, a church program in Hilliard, and something called the Franklin County Senior Services Hotline. I recognized his handwriting. He'd prepared this. He'd sat down at some point, maybe the night before, maybe a week before, and written out that list in his careful block letters, and folded it into an envelope, and this was what he had decided my 64th birthday would be. I got out of the car. I don't know why I did it so easily. I think I was in shock. I took the garbage bag from the back seat, and I stood on the sidewalk and I watched the Kia pull away, and it didn't look back, and I just stood there, holding a bag of my own things in a parking lot, while other people walked past me on their way in and out of a government building. It was March. Cold in the way March is cold. Not winter cold, just grey and damp and cheerless. The sky the colour of old dishwater. I sat down on the bench out front because I didn't know what else to do. I had my wallet, my phone with a cracked screen, and $340. I had nowhere to go. I sat there for a long time. That was when I noticed the man beside me. He'd been there when I sat down, but I hadn't paid attention to him. He was older than me, maybe 70, maybe a little older, with silver hair combed neatly to the side and a good overcoat, the kind with a proper lining. He was sitting very still with a white cane leaning against the bench beside him, and he was facing forward in that particular way that people who can't see sometimes do, fully present, but directed inward. There was a leather messenger bag on the seat between us. We sat in silence for a while. People walked past. A bus went by. Somewhere across the street, a dog was barking. Then he said, without turning his head, "You sound like a man who'd just received some very bad news." I looked at him. I didn't say anything. "No," he agreed. "But you sat down the way people sit down when their legs have just stopped working properly. And you've been quiet for 20 minutes in that particular way." He paused. "I've been blind for 9 years. You learn to pay attention to what you can." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said the truth. My son just dropped me off here with a garbage bag. The man was quiet for a moment. Today. About 20 minutes ago. Another pause. Is it your birthday? I looked at him. How did you know that? I didn't. I was asking. The corner of his mouth moved, though the fact that you didn't immediately say no is telling. I let out a breath. It wasn't quite a laugh. Yeah, it's my birthday. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're deciding something. Then he said, my driver is coming in 15 minutes. I have a car and know where I need to be until this evening, and I'm tired of sitting in this particular spot. He turned his head toward me, not quite at me, but close enough that it felt direct. You look like a man who could use a cup of coffee and a place to sit that isn't a government parking lot. If you're willing to tolerate the company of an old man you don't know. I thought about the 3 names on the list in my pocket. I thought about Lorraine and what she would say if she could see me right now. I thought about how cold it was. All right, I said. His name was August. August Whitfield. I didn't learn much more than that in those first hours. He was measured with personal information in a way that I came to understand later was habit, not coldness. His driver was a quiet young man named Reuben, who helped him into a black Lincoln and didn't seem surprised at all to find an extra passenger. We went to a place called Florentine's on 5th Avenue. Not a chain, a real restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and a lunch menu that didn't have pictures. August ordered without looking at the menu, which told me he'd been there before. I ordered coffee and the French onion soup because it was the cheapest thing, and I was already calculating how long $340 could last. August heard me ordering and said, "Get whatever you'd like. This is on me." "You don't have to do that." "I know." He picked up his coffee cup and held it in both hands. "But it's your birthday, and I've had an unexpectedly pleasant morning, and I'd rather eat lunch with someone than eat it alone, so let me." We talked for 2 hours. He asked me about Lorraine, and I told him. He asked me about the library system, and I found myself talking about things I hadn't thought about in years. The smell of the main branch in the morning, the regulars who came every single day, the way the light came through the windows in the reading room on winter afternoons. He listened the way very few people listen, without waiting for his turn, without checking his phone, just listening. I asked him what he did, and he said he was retired now, mostly. He'd been in commercial real estate development for 40 years. He built and managed several mixed-use properties across central Ohio, office complexes, retail centers, a medical office park out in Dublin. His wife had died 4 years ago. He had a daughter in Portland who called on Sundays and a son in Charlotte who called less often. "And you," he said, "where will you go tonight?" I was honest. I told him about the list. I told him about the shelter on Livingston and the church program and the hotline. He listened without expression. Then he said, "I have a guest suite in my home that hasn't been used in 8 months. My housekeeper, Bea, has been after me to air it out." He set his coffee cup down. "This is not charity. I'm 71 years old. I live in a large house by myself, and I have been advised by my doctor, my daughter, and my attorney, all within the past year, that I ought to have someone around who can assist with certain things. I don't want a nurse. I don't want a caregiver. I want someone who can drive and read mail and tell me when I buttoned my shirt wrong." He paused. "You spent 30 years managing a library. You understand systems and routine and being useful without being intrusive. So this is a proposal, not a rescue. You'd have your own space. You'd have a fair arrangement, and neither of us would have to be alone on a Tuesday afternoon in March." I sat there looking at him for a long moment. He couldn't see my face, but I think he knew I was thinking. "Why?" I said finally. He smiled. It was a real smile, not a polite one. "Because you sat down on that bench, and you didn't ask anyone for anything, and you were still sitting there 20 minutes later. In my experience, people like that are worth knowing." I moved in that Thursday. The house was in Upper Arlington, a wide two-story brick colonial on a street lined with old oak trees. It was the kind of house that had been properly lived in for decades, full of books and framed photographs and a kitchen with a hanging rack of pots that actually showed wear. My room was on the first floor, off the back hallway, with its own bathroom and a window that looked out onto the yard. Bea came 3 mornings a week and kept the place running. Reuben drove August to appointments and the occasional dinner. My days took on a shape I hadn't expected to want. I drove August to his Tuesday lunches with a former business partner. I read the Wall Street Journal to him in the mornings, and the Dispatch on Sundays, and occasionally letters from his attorney that he couldn't bother to have Reuben read, because he said Reuben had a flat affect that made everything sound like a parking ticket. I cooked dinner 3 or 4 nights a week. I'd been cooking since Lorraine got sick and couldn't, and August ate everything I made and never once complained, though he did ask once if I'd considered using slightly less salt. We watched baseball games on the radio, which sounds like a contradiction but worked perfectly. We argued about the Clippers. He told me about the building he'd developed on High Street in 1987 that everyone said would fail and didn't. I told him about the time a patron at the Whetstone branch smuggled in a cat for 6 weeks before anyone noticed. He laughed at that, a real laugh from the belly. I hadn't made someone laugh like that in a long time. 3 months passed, then 4. Then it was July, hot and humid the way Columbus gets in July, and I was sitting on the back porch reading the paper while August had his afternoon call with his attorney, and I heard raised voices inside. Or, not raised exactly, but tightened, the way voices get when someone is working to stay controlled. I didn't listen deliberately, but the kitchen window was open and the porch is just outside it. The arrangement is irregular, and from a liability standpoint. Theodore has been here 4 months, Gerald. He's not a liability. He's a person. I understand that, but when we're talking about the revisions to the estate documents, we're talking about what I want. Write it the way I asked you to write it. A pause. Then August's attorney said something I couldn't make out. And August said, clearly, then find me an attorney who will. I went back inside and started on dinner and didn't say anything about it. August came to the table that evening quieter than usual. I put a plate in front of him and sat down across from him, and we ate for a while without talking. Then he said, "You heard that?" "Some of it." "I'm making some changes to my estate plan," he said. "It's nothing you need to concern yourself with today. But I want you to know that I have a good attorney, and I've been thinking clearly, and what I'm doing is what I've decided to do." He picked up his fork. "I also want you to know that Bea has worked for me for 16 years, and she's in there too. She doesn't know yet either." I looked at him across the table. "August, you don't owe me anything." "I know that," he said simply. "That's rather the point." I didn't know what to do with that. I said, "Thank you," and he waved his hand like thank you was unnecessary. And we finished dinner, and he asked me what was in the dessert, and I said apple crisp, and he said, "Good." Jeffrey called me in September. I hadn't heard from him since March. His number came up on my cracked phone screen, and I sat there looking at it for 4 rings before I answered. "Dad," his voice was careful, measured. "I've been thinking about you. I wanted to check in." "I'm well," I said. A pause. "Where are you staying?" "With a friend." "Oh." Another pause. Is it one of the senior places? One of those assisted living?" "No," I said. "It's a home. I'm staying with a friend." I could hear him recalibrating. "That's good. That's really good, Dad. I'm glad." His voice relaxed a notch, and that relaxing told me something. He'd been worried about what I'd say, not about how I was. Natalie and I were talking, and we feel bad about how things went. The timing was terrible. We know that. And if you ever wanted to come for dinner or see the kids. "I appreciate that," I said. It was a hard spring, you know. Things were tight, and the house was. "Jeffrey," I kept my voice even. "I appreciate you calling. I'm doing well. I'll let you know if anything changes." After I hung up, I sat for a while in the kitchen. Then I got up and finished the dishes. August had his annual medical checkup in October and came home from it quieter than usual. He didn't tell me what the doctors had said, and I didn't press, but he seemed to settle something in himself over the following weeks, some internal decision that made him calmer rather than anxious, the way people sometimes get when they've stopped fighting something. He called his daughter in Portland more often. He dictated a long letter to his college roommate who lived in Scottsdale now, and I typed it out for him and sent it. He had Gerald, his attorney, who had apparently found his way to doing what August asked, out the house twice for long meetings in the study. One evening in November, he asked me to sit with him in the living room after dinner, which was not unusual, but the way he asked it was. He was in the armchair by the window, and he had his hands folded on his knee in that deliberate way. "I want to tell you some things," he said, "so you don't find out from strangers, and so you have time to understand them before anything happens." He told me about the estate plan. He was careful and clear about it, the way he'd been clear about everything from the beginning. He had 2 children and had made provisions for both of them. He had also made provisions for both of them. He had also made provisions for Bea, whose loyalty he said was worth more than most people understood, and he had made a provision for me. "You don't have to do this," I said. "We've had this conversation," he said. "I know I don't have to. I've also revised my medical directives, and I'd like you to be aware of those as well, in case there's ever a situation where the children are unreachable." We talked for an hour. When it was over, he asked me to make us tea, and I did. And we drank it listening to a Cincinnati Pops broadcast on the radio, and neither of us said anything important, and it was one of the better evenings I can remember. February arrived, and with it the reading of a document I hadn't known August had completed. He passed in his sleep in January, quietly, at home, which was what he'd wanted. His daughter, Rose, flew in from Portland and stayed for 2 weeks. She was a composed, intelligent woman in her early 40s who shook my hand the first day and cried on my shoulder the second day and made me feel like I'd known her for years. His son, Martin, flew in from Charlotte for the service and flew back the next morning. The attorney's office was in a building on Broad Street downtown. Gerald, who had turned out to be a precise and decent man once August had made his wishes clear to him, had scheduled the reading for a Thursday morning. Rose was there. Martin had arranged to dial in by phone. Bea sat next to me in her good coat, holding a tissue she hadn't used yet. The document was thorough. August had been meticulous. Rose received a house and the bulk of the investment accounts. Martin received a substantial sum and the contents of the storage unit August kept in Grandview. Bea received a trust set up specifically for her, enough to retire comfortably and fully fund her 2 grandchildren's college educations. Gerald read the relevant section slowly, and Bea pressed the unused tissue against her mouth. I received a different kind of trust, one that August had structured carefully in writing, with Gerald's guidance. It was enough to buy a home outright and live on for the rest of my life without worry, if I was careful. Gerald explained the structure in plain language. There were conditions built in, language that made clear the purpose and intent, signed and witnessed and filed properly with the probate court. There was nothing anyone could do about it, because August had made sure of that. When the reading was finished, Martin said from the phone, "I want to note that I think it's unusual for someone outside the family to receive." "Martin." Rose's voice was calm. "He was family." A silence from the phone. "He was with Dad every day for 10 months, Rose said. "He cooked his dinners. He read him the paper. He was there when Dad woke up at 3 in the morning and couldn't sleep and wanted someone to talk to. Were you there for that?" Nothing from the phone. "Then we're done here," she said. Gerald closed his folder. Jeffrey found out through a mutual acquaintance who worked at the title company, small city, Columbus. Information moves. He called me 2 days after the reading. His voice had a new quality in it, something I recognized as the cousin of the voice he'd used when he was a teenager and wanted something. "Dad, I'd been hearing some things." "Probably true," I said. "I didn't. Look, when we made that decision in March, we didn't know you were going to." He stopped. "I just want you to know that we never intended for things to go the way they did. We were in a hard place. And if there's ever anything you need, or if you wanted to look into maybe helping out with the mortgage, now that things are." "Jeffrey," I said, "I love you. You're my son. I'm not going to pretend March didn't happen, because it did happen, and it's going to take time, but I'm not going to punish you for it either." A silence. "What I am going to do," I said, "is buy a house. I'm going to have my own home. And when you and the kids want to visit, the door will be open, but it'll be my door." He didn't have much to say to that. I found a house in Clintonville, a neighborhood I'd always liked. Old trees and wide porches, and the kind of streets where people still know their neighbors. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with an actual garden, untended but there, waiting. It needed some work, which suited me fine. I'd spent 31 years keeping a building system running. I know how to fix things. Rose called me on the day I signed the closing papers. She'd known it was happening because I'd told her, and she'd asked to be informed. "August would have liked this," she said. "I know," I said. He used to say that the best thing about having means was being able to do something useful with them. I heard her exhale slowly. "He thought you were worth doing something useful for." I stood in the empty living room of my new house, with the phone against my ear, afternoon light coming through the dusty windows, and for the first time in a very long time I thought about Lorraine. Not with grief, or not only with grief, with something that felt more like gratitude. She had loved a man worth helping. August had seen it. And whatever comes next, I have a floor under my feet and a door I can open and close as I choose. There is a particular kind of family you don't choose, and a particular kind you do. I lost one on a cold morning in March in a government parking lot. I found the other on the same bench 20 minutes later in a good overcoat. The oak trees on my street are starting to bud. Spring is coming. And I am home. I keep coming back to that bench. Not the house in Upper Arlington, not the attorney's office, not even the moment Gerald read August's name in that document. I keep coming back to the bench and to the 20 minutes I sat there without asking anyone for anything. I didn't know then that August was watching me in the only way he could. I didn't know he was measuring something. I just knew I was cold and embarrassed and trying not to fall apart in a government parking lot on my birthday. I wasn't performing dignity. I had nothing left to perform with. I was just sitting there, doing the only thing I knew how to do when things go badly. Staying quiet, staying upright, not making it someone else's problem. And somehow, that was enough. I've thought a lot about why things turned out the way they did, not in a mystical sense. I'm not a man who believes the universe keeps a ledger, but I do believe that how you carry yourself in the worst moments is the truest advertisement for who you are. August couldn't see my face. He couldn't read my clothes or my car or any of the things people usually use to size each other up. All he had was the weight of how I sat down and the silence I kept and what he heard in those things. He said people who don't ask for anything are worth knowing. I think what he meant was that character announces itself even when you're not trying to announce it. Jeffrey made his choice that morning. I don't say that with business anymore, mostly. He weighed what he thought I cost against what he thought I was worth, and he made a calculation. What he didn't understand, what I think he still doesn't fully understand, is that those calculations tend to come back around, not as punishment, just as consequence. You treat a person like a liability long enough, and eventually the math stops working in your favor. I think about the 31 years I spent keeping those library buildings running. Nobody saw most of that work. Pipes don't get thanked. HVAC systems don't get applause. You just do the job every day because the job matters and because showing up consistently is its own kind of integrity. August had spent 40 years building things from the ground up in a city that wasn't always sure it wanted what he was offering. We understood each other in that way. Two men who knew that the work is the thing and that the work tells the truth about you, whether anyone's paying attention or not. What I know now, sitting in my own living room in Clintonville with the garden starting to wake up outside, is this: the life I have came from keeping my head clear when it would have been easier to collapse, from being honest with a stranger when honesty cost me nothing but felt like it might, and from showing up every single day in that house on Guilford Road and doing what I said I would do. Not for a reward, not because I saw it coming, just because that's what you do. Lorraine used to say that a person's character is what they do in the rooms when nobody's watching. August was blind. Every room was a room when nobody was watching, and somehow that made it matter more. The oak trees are budding. I have a door I can close and open as I choose. That's enough. That's more than enough.